I didn't. No, I don't. I think I had I had moments where I felt that this is something that I like, especially when you refer to concepts from somebody else. Then it would be really interesting to hear more about. Yeah, because okay, maybe some of them I know, and then for example with this distribution of the sensible, I got very interested in that's actually a very interesting question. How do you see it? Because I understand it from a different context. I don't understand it differently, but I never thought about it. I mean, it's a very interesting question about what do you mean with the distribution of sensible, and then. Also, yeah, in a way, always like when you mention Jana Parviainen or Bruno Latour, I get very interested about this. Okay, what is the, and it's kind of short here.
So, I mean, in writing with practice, I also write about body weather a bit and body weather background, and I try to give a bit of the history, but I don't go deep into a criticism.
You really don't at all. You don't go at all into criticism, and it's like this is maybe my main criticism towards the writings of your three texts, is that there's a little bit it does, which doesn't come across from the way you speak and the way that you practice with us. But in the text, there's a little bit of this. It feels like that you're not opening up problematics of the. Obviously, I understand that you're a lot of describing how you came to the research score and that. But I would think that they would be better research if you tried to make the weak points or your own questions or the problematics sort of more easily accessible. Now it feels like you're trying to convince the reader that this is a good idea. I'm sorry, I'm being now a bit blunt. It's very convincing. You do a good job at convincing.
Yes.
But the kind of the questions and the problematics that have come up with conversation within these 4 days, I found really. I would be really interested in reading about those things.
Okay.
So I'm wondering how also the practice postulates, or the language of use of practice postulates a kind of a true, authentic, unconstructed body, and then hides the constructed nature of the experience of perception, as if perception was somehow pure, and how we are articulating the practice both by words and by doing the practice, how that's actually constructing perception, and can it be differently constructed or deconstructed, and opening. So if you opened up these kind of questions, it's not so much about criticism in a it's more kind of opening up the implicit assumptions of the practice, really, which can then, of course, lead to the changing of the practice or becoming more self-aware. I had another question. Sorry if I'm just bouncing, or kind of an observation or thought. What's the you talk about the research score and the reflection through the research score. I don't know if we can. The spoken reflection, maybe. I'm sorry, I'm using words. I don't know, because obviously there's also to call that writing, or what is writing? Big swamp opened up in front of me there. Anyway, you talk about it it becomes an artistic practice in a way. But then my question is a little bit what's the place of this artistic practice? Because in these texts, it's you hardly there's you show a little bit of that text, or that transcription of these texts as as a kind of a curiosity or a little like snippet. You're not actually using it. You're not referring to it. You're not kind of where does it like what's its status? If you're thinking if you postulating that this is a mode of accessing a different way of thinking, then where does this thinking where does this thinking get to go? Like what's its value? How do you value it? How do you give it space? Yeah. So the question is, how does it like we're talking about these articles now? Then how could that kind of thought become more? That is also very much questioning the form of what we used to think as academic writing.
Mm-hmm.
How could this start shaping and reforming what we approach as academic writing differently?
There's kind of something on brutality or invasion. Like it's somehow there's something really about, breaking apart another body. I mean, if it's really, it's quite invasive by intention. It's called the manipulations. It's based on submission, how do you say, agreed upon submission, of course, but still, and it has a sort of relentlessness, and to just, you might say this is all not true or has nothing to do with the manipulations, but if it has something to do with the manipulations, then somehow there also needs to be conversation about it, of the roots, or just what is just with this idea of manipulating. And also this, so one of my notes was, was eine krasse Praxis.
Was eine krasse Praxis.
and that was related to this like really this really highly mental focus that we talked a lot about in Berlin, this constant cutting, not allowing of entering any deep elongated feeling states, because that somehow equals getting lost and blurred. So it's like this, constant hacking, cutting, and re-alerting the mind, which is super interesting, because I think it does bring sometimes I can have the sense that I can feel the friction between body and mind, or both are somehow quivering and activated, and I'm not as I would maybe in other somatic practices, like dive into this luscious world of sensing, feeling, expansiveness, and endlessness, and feeling, and so I'm really intrigued by this cutting, and it took me a while to appreciate it, I think, or to understand it as something really interesting and positive. But I think it's something that's really specific and crucial. So this is also. So there's all this, and then there's also this sense of really like close proximity and deep care, and really and intimacy and tenderness. That's also in it. So I'm just saying all kinds of things that I have in my now small experience of the manipulations and the research school. That I don't see so much discussed or raised in the text.
If any kind of authenticity in the body with the practice is not really your focus, or not at all important
anymore,
then
throw it away.
Yeah, what are we talking about with body weather? Why do we use so much time on body weather? It's not body. It doesn't have to be body weather.
No, but it is also a bit of that's why never revealing. But of like, if I would not talk about body weather at all, it would be mystifying at the same. So I mean, it has to be clear. Like where is it coming from?
Can I be so silly that can you not just come up with new name for your practice?
Yes, I thought about it. I thought
And
to
then
call
we
it
can
that.
refer to body weather. I actually sprung from body weather training, and this happened, and then I chose this element. Was very interesting, and I thought it very important, and then had a very strong personal connection, and then put it out, magnified it, and then elaborated it. Went even deep going further, and this is where I am at the moment. So. Nothing to do with body weather.
Yes, and yet it would not be fair to say it has nothing to do with body weather.
Well, you
Because
don't have to be nothing to do with, but it's not. It's more than a version, your version of body weather. It's not. It's almost not body weather. Let's say.
I really enjoyed the translation of the tour model into what you're doing.
Yes.
I found it very informative. It helped me to understand. But what sprang up for me there was that in the Latour text, the odour as such, or the proposition of the odour, or the articulation of being able to detect the odour, is part of a huge assemblage, including the teacher, the students in the room, the industry, the factories, the blah, the blah, the blah, the blah. And I wanted that to be unpacked for the touch. So I really wanted to see the whole complex where the touch of the research score or the manipulations is an articulation of actually a huge system. And is potentially quite specific. Because in this context, if you're using it to talk just about the manipulations, you don't have to go into the research context. But if you're talking about the touch within the research context, then you have to unpack that collision of those two worlds, I think. I suppose it's for it could be a potential way of unpacking the avant-garde dance theatre context of Maijuku as well, and what was it used for? How did that way of touching come into being? I suppose because wherever it arose and whatever context that was, that's where it comes from actually, which might include shiatsu, for instance, and all that stuff. That could be interesting because then you go, "Oh, what is this touch?" It arouses my curiosity because touch is such a generic term. That I want to know which touch, because I suppose, I like that kind of specificity because it avoids the whole meta-language sort of thing or whatever, the illusion of objectivity or